I think that everybody can agree that The Weeknd is the best, and in this video we're gonna rank The Weeknd. Alright, let's do this. 3rd place Friday, 2nd place Sunday, and in 1st place Saturday.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
So on second thought, in today's video, we're going to be ranking the albums and mixtapes of 29-year-old Canadian R&B pop singer, The Weeknd. I think Abel is super capable of making incredible music. When his stuff is good, it's unbelievable, but when he makes bad music, it's just very forgettable for me. And I would consider myself a pretty big fan of his, even if I don't love a lot of his discography. I'm still rooting for him and waiting on him to put out his masterpiece, and so in honor of The Weeknd dropping a couple of new singles, I'm gonna go through all of his major releases and rank them against one another. Being that I am including the first few mixtapes individually, we're gonna ignore Trilogy for obvious reasons, and here we go. Oddly enough, I don't really have any idea of how other people would rank this guy's music, so I'm not sure how controversial this list is gonna be. With that being said, I don't dislike Kissland, I just don't really like it at all. This was supposed to be his big debut album, and in the years that have followed its release, I can probably count on one hand the amount of times that I've gone back to it. I just think it's this weird, uninteresting blend of kind of trying to make some stuff for the radio, while also trying to keep a little bit of that edge that he had earlier on in his career, and I think the whole album comes up short. Like I said, I would consider myself a pretty big fan of The Weeknd, and if you were going to pay me to name more than a few songs on this project, I really don't think that I could do it. In my opinion, this has the weakest production out of any of Abel's releases, and from a songwriting perspective, I don't really know if he has much to say here. We get the usual blend of drugs and partying and girls and so on, but on this project more than any of his other stuff, I don't think that he really elaborates on the tracks. It's all pretty surface level. And I sound like I'm being harsh, but I'm gonna reiterate that I don't hate this thing. His falsetto is still his falsetto, it's still a joy hearing him sing, but I struggle finding any songs on this album that really connect with me in any way. Favorite tracks would probably just be Pharrell's Wanderlust remix, because gun to my head, I think that that's the only one that I could talk about in depth. The instrumental is a little quirkier than the other songs on the record, Pharrell's background vocals make this feel more dynamic, and I do like the lyrical themes on the original version, but the remix makes the song feel more complete as a whole. Up next we have My Dear Melancholy, and again, I just don't really care about this one at all. I think Call Out My Name was one of the weakest singles that he's ever dropped, and when that's the big standout song on the EP, I just... The main thing that saves this for me is the fact that it is so short, and we have Gestaffelstein featured on 2 of the songs, so at least some of it sounds unique and different and new compared to everything else in Abel's discography. 2013's Aleph, however you pronounce it, is an album that I really enjoyed, so I was excited to see what he would bring to the table here. I think the noisy, aggressive, electronic stuff works well with Abel's voice, and I really wish that The Weeknd would try more stuff like this. I think him working with somebody like Sophie would be amazing. This project followed a rather disastrous span of time for Abel and his love life, and the EP seems kind of rushed to me. It's like he had these breakups and he wanted to make music about them, which is cool, like do your thing, but I just don't hear a collection of high-quality songs on My Dear Melancholy. With that being said, it is actually pretty cohesive in terms of listening to it from front to back. I think it flows together nicely because everything feels pretty dark, sonically and thematically, but half of the tracks just seem like B-sides to me. Favorite tracks are the 2 that I mentioned before, I Was Never There, and Hurt You. Alright, so Starboy is bloated. It's 18 tracks and 68 minutes long, and we could probably cut that in half to form a much more likable album, but at the very least, this thing has songs that I actually love. If you've been paying attention so far, when it comes to the projects that I can barely remember, I think the big positives come when Abel works with unique, one-of-a-kind producers. Anybody want to take a guess on what my favorite songs on Starboy are? I think the Daft Punk collaborations on here are awesome. These songs are so rich and lush, and the electronic influences suit his voice so well. The titular track Starboy is so cool and confident, and finally it's Abel successfully blending his R&B pop music and a darker aesthetic with ease. The percussion on the instrumental is so crisp, and the lyrics are as catchy as ever. Then I Feel It Coming is a personal favorite Weeknd song for me. It's this dramatic love song that feels like it's almost bordering on some kind of spacey disco-inspired tune. It's repetitive, sure, but that doesn't stop me from replaying it over and over again. And more than anything, I'm obsessed with the robots doing their vocals on here. It's the best. From there though, I struggle finding many great things to say about the album. The songs start to feel a little lifeless, and we're back to my complaints from before. I think False Alarm is a cool song. It's probably the most chaotic thing that he's ever made, which is definitely worth noting because I Can Be Kind of Wild Sometimes is obviously a common theme within his music. It's kind of messy, but that's probably the point. Sidewalks is funny because I like the idea of the song, but I'm not sure about the execution. That lead guitar is theatrical and fun, the intro with the pause and then the "I ran out of tears when I was 18" line is good, and I'll never usually say no to a Kendrick feature, but I just don't really know if there's a lot of chemistry here. It feels more like they said, alright, let's make the song, and then, I guess we have enough in the budget for a Kendrick feature, rather than them actually working together on building a song from the ground up. So besides those, I'm not really interested. Major ups and downs, a lot of the same stories being told in the lyrics, Abel going back and forth between pop and R&B, and constantly making me feel like the grass is always greener, yada yada yada. At least with this album and everything from here on out, there are more than a couple of songs that I love, and as a whole, I like the album. I'm not just indifferent about it. We already discussed my favorite tracks, but here you go.
Legend of the Fall took the year like a bandit. Bought mama a crib and a brand new feel it coming, babe.
Next, we have Beauty Behind the Madness, which I put on a pretty identical playing field as Starboy. We've got some 10 out of 10 jaw-dropping songs, but as a whole, you would never catch me saying that this album is great. The obvious song to mention here is Can't Feel My Face. This is one of the biggest, most commercially successful tracks over the last decade, and I think it's fully deserved. It has one of the catchiest melodies I've ever heard, and it's a perfect pop song, in my eyes. This was a pivotal moment in Abel's career because before this, he was still mostly the hazy, atmospheric R&B guy who came onto the scene with these moody, brooding mixtapes. Then we got this very danceable, easily accessible song that launched him into superstardom. But the most fascinating thing about Can't Feel My Face is that I do not think this is Abel selling out. Yes, we get a more radio-friendly song, yes, the chorus repeats itself about 300 times, but the themes are classic Weeknd through and through. And then The Hills is arguably my favorite song from him ever. It made a pretty big splash when it came out, but I wish we talked about this thing more. This track goes so incredibly hard, and I will never get sick of it. That noisy Hans Zimmer Inception-like intro, the teasing percussion, Abel's mysterious delivery, and on the chorus his falsetto hits alongside the drop of the instrumental, and it is so intense and powerful, and I absolutely love it. In my eyes, this is the most anthemic thing that he's ever made. And just like with Starboy, from here I can give you a list of of ups and downs. While The Weeknd and Ed Sheeran seems like a strange collaboration at first, I think Dark Times works surprisingly well. Even though Earned It was a pretty huge song, I think that was more about successful marketing than anything else. It's fine, but I only think it did that well because of 50 Shades of Grey. Often is a good mix of Abel's earlier R&B stuff and his transition into pop music. And then with the rest of this stuff, copy and paste the complaints from before. Repetitive storylines that scratch the surface of drugs, parties, and girls, production decent enough to not really make a difference, good or bad, and a lot of generally forgettable songs. Also, more than any other project from The Weeknd, I think this one flips and flops between different subgenres to the point where it becomes a little strange. I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing, but it is a noticeable thing. I mentioned that a plus side of My Dear Melancholy was that it felt very cohesive. Beauty Behind the Madness feels a bit more like somebody's discography on shuffle. These are a few snippets of some of my favorite tracks.
I can feel my face when I can feel my face. My love, I only call you when it's half-assed. By the only time.
And I know that I said that we're dividing up the mixtapes individually and we're not just saying trilogy, but here's the thing. My descriptions of these projects are all practically the same, but I do have a specific preference when it comes to ranking them. So I am going to describe them all together, but then I'm going to give a little compilation of my favorite songs in order of which mixtapes I like the most. In 2011, Abel dropped House of Balloons, Thursday, and Echoes of Silence, and that's how he made his introduction into music. He pulled off a one-year saturation-esque trilogy long before Brockhampton, and he did it by himself. These mixtapes are a tight 9 tracks each, and all of them are up there for some of my favorite projects of all time. It feels weird talking about them because I haven't really discussed these much on the channel before, but yes, I love these things to death. And I don't want this to seem like a, oh man, you love all his old stuff, you hate when musicians evolve, you hate when somebody changes their sound, you're a hater, blah blah blah. No. You've seen from what I've said so far that I've enjoyed Abel throughout his entire career. Yes, it's been full of ups and downs, but the point is, there's stuff on Starboy that I love and treasure that is so far away from Trilogy era Weeknd, and the same with Beauty Behind the Madness. So it's not about me getting sick of him or anything like that. I truly just think that he hasn't made a great, complete album since 2011. There's not a single track on any of these mixtapes that I think stands out in a bad way. None of these things feel bloated, none of them feel too long, and they all flow really well from start to finish. During this time in Abel's life, he was making much different music than he is now. This whole video I've talked about him struggling between choosing a dark aesthetic and a pop sound, and while during these days it was no competition. The dark aesthetic ruled his music, and it was amazing. The juxtaposition between Abel's beautiful, singular, one-of-a-kind voice and the nightmarish songs that he was making was astonishing. He was crooning on these mysterious R&B tunes, and it was genuinely creepy a lot of the time. But then he was also so charming, and that mix of creepy yet charming was intriguing to say the least. These songs were made by a man that was in pain. He was in a bad place, but he was making fantastic music. He was in crisis, but it was irresistible stuff. And this is something important to address. The production across these mixtapes is an interesting topic. These instrumentals, in many ways, were not as technically good and proficient as his later stuff, and that sounds obvious. When you get a bigger budget and fame, you get to work with more people, like these guys for example, and your stuff can sound a lot richer and more finely tuned. But with that being said, the production on this trilogy of mixtapes was so raw and unfiltered that it added to the atmosphere of the whole thing. Remember, we were listening to a guy in crisis mode, so maybe it's a good thing that the instrumentals weren't all squeaky clean. Lyrically across these projects, we got the themes that I've mentioned before in the video. Girls, drugs, parties, power, etc., but here we get the uncut, X-rated versions of all of those things. This is before the fame, before the money. This is when he could say whatever he wanted to and there would be little to no backlash, and boy do these songs get dark. And again, this adds to the conceptual idea that through these mixtapes, we were listening to a seductive madman who was spiraling into depression and anguish and so on. In 2011, Abel was a menace of songwriting. He was penning down lyrics that should have made him repulsive, but each line drew you in more and more. It was this beautiful paradox, and I can't believe that I'm really going in depth on these for the first time on the channel. I feel like a weight is being lifted off my chest. While, like I said, I enjoy The Weeknd's poppier, more accessible stuff, I think his voice is able to shine on these types of songs in ways that wouldn't be possible on something like Can't Feel My Face. With the hazy, drug-induced R&B soundscapes in this trilogy of records, we hear The Weeknd hitting notes in ways that seem rare nowadays. And because the songs are so personal, yet so grotesque, I think there's more emotion in them too. So without further ado, here are my absolute favorite songs from all of these mixtapes. I like, if not love, every single song on all of these track lists, so these are only the best of the best.
Can't feel a damn thing, but I'm not touching around. You fall in love. Don't make me make you fall in love. And I'ma keep on smoking till I can't hit another note. Because he's sleeping with me. Till he
There's enough to pass around. You don't gotta wait in line, and the clocks don't work.
You're the same old song. I'm a nice dude with some nice dreams, and we can turn this to a nightmare. Elm Street. In the middle of the city, after rolling through the city with me, I promise you won't see.
If you're curious, I would compare the two new singles to like B-tier, Starboy, and Beauty Behind the Madness songs. I like them, but I don't love them. I'm excited to hear the album in full, and yeah, thanks for watching. Thank you for watching that video. If you want to support the channel, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. You can follow me on social media at RenshawHS. You can buy my merch, support my Patreon, and thank you again. I'll see you soon.